webinar on information systems control and audit, that is ISCA, one of the most dreaded subjects, as I might call it, in the CA final itself. We'll cover 4 or 5 broad categories or discussion points in this particular webinar. We'll start off with the relevance of ISCA. Why has the subject at all been introduced by ICAI? What is the relevance? Whether information systems audit is a relevant concept at all or not? Then we'll discuss about the 8 chapters which you have. What are the broad points which are covered in those chapters? There is a particular pattern or a particular flow which is followed in those chapters. So we'll discuss about those 8 chapters in brief. Then we'll probably move on to some of the factors which are important for preparation for your exams, since the May exams are pretty close. So we'll discuss about 2 or 3 very important aspects which would help you to prepare for your May 16 and any onward examinations. Particularly, we'll cover 3 broad categories. First is the relevance of headings in this particular chapter. Then we'll talk about what I call as similar sounding questions, which is a major problem area for students as far as ISCA is concerned. And then we'll move on to the third concept, that is we'll take up a case study. And this again, as a case studies are pretty dreaded. A lot of students fear the case studies as to what are these, are they out of syllabus and all. So we'll touch upon a case study and we'll try to understand how the case studies work. So to start, let us first, I'll just brief you on what is the importance of ISCA. Why do we have this subject at all? I think of all the subjects in CA, the first and foremost question, if anybody asks about ISCA, is why do we have that all in the curriculum at all? We are supposed to be chartered accountants. We are working to be chartered accountants. So we should be focused on accounts. We should be focused on taxation. We should be focused on audit. And why do we have the information systems control and audit? Is there any relevance? Yes, it is. So unless we have that in our mind, we'll always be having a negative thought towards the subject. So first of all, we have to shun away the thought as to why do we have this subject at all. Information systems audit, it is a growing domain. It's coming up as a new career opportunity for a lot of chartered accountants. Mostly traditionally we have people working in audit, we have had people working in taxation, in accounts, but now information systems itself is becoming a huge area of opportunities. For example, if you are an internal auditor of a company, and traditionally you have been doing an audit of their sales systems, as we call sales, or their purchase systems, HR, accounts, etc. Now the clients are emphasizing that you also cover information systems or information technology as one of the areas of internal audit. The entire organization, let's say it's working on an ERP, for example, SAP, and then they want to know what are the controls within SAP. So how will you understand the controls within SAP if you do not have a basic understanding of the terms which are pertaining to information systems? Similarly, statutory audit. Now, as part of your statutory audit, for example, you do a lot of testing of controls. As an example, let us say I do a testing of segregation of duties. If as a statutory auditor I am concerned whether the controls are good enough which will prevent fraud or error, whether the segregation of duties is good enough within the organization, then I also need to understand the implementation of this segregation within the information systems. For example, if I'm saying that there is a person who is working in accounts department, I don't want him to post do any work for purchase or for sales because he's been hired for accounts. He should not be working for purchase. There's a lack of segregation of duties. If an accountant is given rights to purchase, he might process a dummy purchase invoice and himself do the payment. So that segregation is lacking. That's a very basic concept in audit. But how do we ensure that this is implemented in systems also? So we need to test that. we need to go into the systems, verify whether this can be verified in the, whether this is implemented in the systems also or not. Again, along with information, statutory audit, internal audit, in fact, audit in itself is also coming out as a career opportunity. I am also a chartered accountant, and I'm doing, trust me, a lot of information systems audit. In fact, I'm supporting a lot of large firms or consulting firms in developing their system audit teams, because that is what clients are asking these days. So first, we need to convince ourselves that, as like any other subject, this also has a practical relevance. A lot of people will end up making their career into system audit, or if not a full-fledged career, even as part of their internal audit, their statutory audit, or they will still be using a lot of systems. So as an introduction, I wanted to say that first, let us convince ourselves that this subject is as important, and otherwise also this is also 100-mark subject like any other subject. There's always a tendency that you will do this in the end, let's leave it for now, let's focus on these subjects and leave skies for now. And what happens in the end, that you pile up a lot of problems for yourself. I've also gone through the same process probably which you are going through, and there is a tendency to defer it, and when it comes close to 1 month or 2 months, then you find that it is too difficult to understand. You go about cramming it as much as possible. A lot of people pass also, but a lot of people don't. So cramming is now not the only solution. You need to understand the concepts, especially with case studies being put in. You need to understand the concept. You cannot simply cram topics. Earlier, probably in my time, things weren't that difficult. Most of the questions were characteristics of this, features of this, 5 points in this, 4 points in this, and those could be answered. But now with the advent of case studies, those things have become difficult. So it's cramming itself is not the solution. You need to understand the concept. Very often I ask my students that even people who have qualified as CS, you have studied information systems control and audit. Can you give me an example of information system? A lot of people are not aware as to what is an information system, or they can't exactly give an example. Whereas information system is something we use so frequently, so often. For example, Tally. The simplest example of information system is every article or CA has more or less worked at some time in his life. Any ERP is an information system. You book tickets on IRCTs, it is an information system. You go to a shopping mall, do a purchase, there's a machine which is installed there to process your payments, that's information system. Any ERP, any banking software, all these are information systems. So if we understand that concept, we're going to be able to understand that this is a very, very practical thing which we come across every now and then. So that was a brief introduction of the, if I would say, the relevance of information system control and audit as part of a chartered accountant student's preparation and a chartered accountant's career. Moving on, let's understand what is the content of this particular subject. There are 8 chapters which have been given in the subject, and I normally suggest a pattern to understand those 8 chapters. I would suggest that these should be studied in a particular order, so to make us more aware of what the topics are. Because in totality, it talks about different aspects of an information system. So the 8 topics or the 8 chapters which are covered. The first is information system concepts, that is basic understanding. Second is acquisition, development, and implementation of information systems. Third is the protection of information systems. Fourth is business continuity planning and disaster recovery planning. Fifth is auditing of information systems. Then we have the concept of governance and management of information systems. Then we have information technology regulatory issues, and last is the emerging technologies. So these are the 8 different chapters pertaining to this subject, and let's now try to correlate all the 8 chapters. Because unless we have as I teach and as the queries come from students, a lot of time, in fact, a student a few days back mentioned, she was talking to me, she got 56 in ISCA, and I said, how did you do that? She said, I remembered a very important point from you. First of all, the point was that if you're reading the paper, first of all, you should know where it is coming from. At times, in a subject like ISCA, people go blank as to where has this question come from, which chapter does it pertain to. And that problem primarily is because of the fact that there is no understanding of the subject in totality. You have picked up a practice manual, you have studied different questions from the practice manual, but there is no understanding of how the subject is, how the subject flows, how the subject moves in totality. So for that, we need to understand how the 8 chapters have been organized. So if you're studying, first of all, take up the basic concepts chapter, which is named Information System Concept. In this, you will be told as to what is the system. You will be told what is information system. I'll just cover a little bit of that topic here, so that because the entire subject is based on this topic. The word information systems is made of 2 terms. One is information, one is system. System can be anything which has got input, processing, and output. One of the examples which is given is the concept of a manufacturing company, which takes some raw materials, processes it, and produces the finished good. So that is a system. Even in your IPCC, you would have studied about the concept of input, processing, and output. So that is what a system is. But we are not studying about all the systems in the subject. We are only studying about information systems. So information system, again, like any other system, it has also got an input. It also does some processing, and it also gives you some output. But all these things, input, process, and output, should be based or should be restricted to the information. So objective of this system is to give you information. What does your tally do? As a simple example of an accounting system, tally. In tally, you put in some input. What is that input? Vouchers, debit vouchers, credit vouchers, account cash vouchers, bank vouchers, whatever it is supposed. Those are input. Processing is done. Processing means if you have put in entry debtor to sales, the debtors are taken to balance sheet, sales are taken to revenue account. And what is the output? The output is your trial balance, profit and loss, balance sheet. And why are they made? To give information to the management, to help them in taking decisions, to help them in filing their tax returns, to help them in doing compliances. So that information is generated from this system. So when I teach, I always say, keep an example of tally always in mind. If you have worked on ERP, keep an ERP in mind. If you have gone to a big bazaar or a retail outlet, so there is something installed on the for payments, keep that in mind. That is also information system. So all these are examples of information systems. So first chapter primarily talks about different types of information systems. It will tell you what is a MIS, what is a transaction processing system, what is a executive information. So there are a lot of information systems which are covered in the first chapter. So you should always start your preparation with information system concepts. Once you have covered that, the second chapter you should pick up is acquisition, development, and implementation of information systems. Now, what is this chapter? This chapter focuses on how do we develop a system. How would have Tally been developed? Tally would have included 2 types of people. One would be the accounting people who would have got the mind to understand how the accounting should work, and then there would have been the people from systems who would be doing the programming. So thought would have come, some cost would have incurred, some profits would have imagined, some thought would have been put in as to how the system would work. So the entire process of developing the system is called acquisition, development, and implementation of information systems. To take another example, I am a small business, let us say. My turnover is not more than 2 or 3 crores. I'm relying on Tally for my accounting. And for purchase and sales, I'm doing a manual system. I have a manual purchase orders, I have manual sales invoices. I do the purchases when the material comes in, the supplier's invoice comes in, I book it into a tally. Similarly, when sales are generated, invoices are booked, I again put all those entries into tally. That's what a small business does. And at the end of the year, I have my balance sheet, profit and loss, everything in place. But now my system or my business turnover moves from 5 crores to 100 crores in the next 4 years. Now I cannot rely on the manual system, so I need to develop a technology-driven information system. I cannot rely on manually printed purchase orders and printed sales invoices. I want some software for that. So how do I do that? There has to be a process which has to be followed. That entire process is covered in the second chapter, that is acquisition, development, and implementation of information systems. The process will tell you first discuss what do you want, why do you want a new system. It has got 6 and 7 stages, 4 or 5 methods. Why do you want a system? What benefits are you going to get? Which software are you going to use? Are you going to make it yourself or are you going to outsource it to somebody else? How will you do the testing? How will you implement the systems? All these thoughts should come into acquisition, development, and implementation of information systems. Then we talk about the protection of information. How do you make them secure? How do you make them safe? Again, simple example. Whenever you work on Tally, whenever you work on ERP, whenever you log into IRCTC, CTC, whenever you log into any bank's website, do you not put a password in there? A simplest example of protecting your information systems. You want your Tally to be safe. You don't want any non-accounts, non-authorized person to do any entries in Tally. So you want to ensure that your Tally is safe. So you put a password. So password is the simplest example of protection of information systems. Then you talk of business continuity planning and disaster recovery planning. In this chapter, you talk of a situation when a system crashes or something goes wrong. How will you recover? Now, and again, I'll give you a very small example to understand. You would have seen in your offices that a lot of time we take backup of your accounting or your Tally data. What is the backup for? What is the purpose of backup? The purpose is if tomorrow my Tally crashes, for example, I'm a very small CA firm, I'm taking the backup of Tally, let's say every week. On a Saturday evening, I've taken the backup, and on Tuesday morning, my system crashes. So I would know that all I need to do is to put back that backup from Saturday evening and do the accounting entries for Monday, and again I'm back to the position I was. But suppose I have not taken a backup for 6 months, then what do? If my system crashes, I need to again enter all the transactions for 6 months, again verify everything, again do the checks. So that is a lot of problem for me. I'm giving the example where I'm doing the, let us say I'm providing accounting support to one of my clients. Or it's a small company which is doing its own accounting. So I need to take that backup. I need to have a procedure that if a backup would be taken, where will I store the backup? What will happen? How the process would work? And if I take it to larger scale, this is a small example of a Tally backup being lost. A larger scale would be a natural disaster hitting an organization. For example, a flood which has hit an organization, a lot of things are in trouble. Then how do you restore that? So in that case, I need to have procedures in place. All that is covered as part of the business continuity planning. Next is your auditing of information systems. Again, as I said, this has become a career opportunity in itself. This chapter will tell you about what problems auditor face, what are the different aspects of audit. Another small example from this particular chapter, if let us say I go for an audit, a balance sheet audit of an organization, and as part of that, I'm supposed to review the depreciation. So as a traditional auditor, it's a tendency within me to ask for a printed depreciation schedule, which we normally ask. So when assets have been purchased, I would verify from the bills. Assets have been sold, I'll verify from the documents. Depreciation, I'll see what is the rate prescribed as per say Companies Act, for example, and verify that. Now, if the company is fully automated, you will not get printed documents for that as easily. They would say, we have a system. When I buy an asset, I book an invoice. The system automatically starts computing depreciation from the very date of purchase. It keeps on doing that every month. We don't have a monthly or a yearly depreciation. We have a daily depreciation system. So we don't have a printed document. You need to understand how the systems. You take this login ID and password for an audit, say with audit rights, where you can't process any transactions. You can view all the transactions, and you see for yourself how the depreciation has been done. So unless the auditor has a comfort working with the systems, he cannot verify those things. You cannot ask for printouts for each and everything these days. You need to go into the systems. So chapter 5 focuses on the auditing of information systems. Then is the concept of governance. Now this is again a dreaded chapter. Concept of governance is talks about governance, is talks about risk assessment. So these are some of the things which trouble people a lot. Governance, risk assessment, these are the broad level things. I know we are all aware of what the governance is. Governance is a top level oversight. For example, you would have studied in other subjects the concept of independent directors, the concept of audit committees. What are those things? These are governance. We have these people do not participate in routine activities. They are for the oversight. They provide the oversight to the organization. They view it from a top level to ensure that everything is going fine. Similarly, if those people also view the IT from a top level, that can be covered as part of governance within IT. So in this chapter, we talk of governance, we talk of risk assessment and all these other topics. So these first 6 chapters are interrelated in a way that if you study each chapter in totality, you are bound to get confused. I would request, don't break the order. I have put in this order after years of research, so rely on that and try to follow the same order. Start with understanding the information system, what are the information concepts. Then move on to how to acquire or develop the information system. Then move on to how to protect the information system. Then move on to how to ensure your business continuity planning and disaster recovery planning is good. Then how to audit the systems, and post that, let's talk about governance and management, governance of the systems. Then there are 2 more chapters: information technology, regulatory issues, which talks about your IT Act, etc. And last is your emerging technologies, which talks about green IT and these other concepts. So these are 8 chapters which are in a particular order, and I would suggest that you follow this order to have a broad understanding of the subject. One question very frequently people ask that, can I skip a chapter? Can I leave chapter? Which is the important chapter? Should I focus on any particular 2 chapters, 3 chapters? Can I leave one? I would say in this subject, you can't do that. There are only 8 chapters. 100 marks paper has to be set. Very, very rare that any chapter would be missed out in entirety. It often happens in a lot of other subjects. There are 20 chapters, you don't cover 2 or 3. Here it can't work that way. A question does come from each of the chapters. I have not seen in any attempt that a question has not been asked from any chapter. And the best part is the average also varies. The marks might go up or it might drastically go down. There was a chapter on IT earlier. It was specifically called IT, which is now called Information Technology Regulatory Issues. There was a question for almost 20 marks in one attempt and 4 marks in another. So leave that thing. A lot of students have that tendency because they're pretty close to the examination, and their tendency is there as to skip 1 or 2 chapters and focus on important ones. So you can't do that. There are only 8 chapters. By default, if you are leaving 2 chapters, that means you are straight away 15 to 20 marks you are losing by default, even if these are small chapters. So don't do that. You should not be doing that. You need to study all the chapters. Then coming to as to some of the points I would suggest for preparation. First is, this is not a subject which you can do in a single sitting. Don't do that. A lot of people, even I would have done that. It's not that I have also come through the same channels which probably you are coming through. There is a tendency for us to fix a particular slot for a subject. Okay, from 15th to 25th, I'm going to wipe out ISCA. I'll do ISCA exclusively, and then I'm done. After that, I'll pick it up in the exams. Don't do that with this subject. This is primarily because of the fact that you carry a perception that this is a theory paper. You carry a perception that I don't know ISCA. You carry a perception that this is not practical. Accounting and tax is something I relate to, I can't do with ISCA. Since you are carrying too many perceptions, it is not suggested that you take up the subject in a lot and then leave it and again take it up. Because in that case, a situation comes when close to the exams you are blank. As I said, the first problem you face is if you read a question, where has this question come from? Because you have given a lot of time to a subject in a totality, and then you have left it, you have picked up after say 1.5, 2 months, you totally go blank. I have seen that. My students have faced that problem. A lot of other people have faced that problem, so don't do that. I would suggest that you devote a particular time to this particular subject. For example, if I'm appearing for both groups and I know that I have divided slots for different subjects, account, tax, etc. So even if I put in half an hour or 1 hour every day, I know my exam is after 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. So that some slots should be identified rather than pushing the entire subject in one go. That will not work. It will only work if you have a very good knowledge of information systems. You do a lot of audits and you have a basic understanding of the subject. But not normally that is not the scenario. So don't go for that. Try to focus. Try to give some time to the subject. Probably, as I say, half an hour, 1 hour every day. Don't put 20 hours, 15 hours at one go and then leave it. So that is a suggestion I often give to my students. Then this subject in particular, I think, and a lot of audit subjects in general has a particular feature, and that is the headings. The headings are very, very important. I'm not saying that the rest of the part is not important, but a lot of questions, in fact, 40 to 50% of the questions, even more than that, almost 60 to 65% of the questions are based on headings. You pick up any paper, you pick up any past examination, and you compare the suggested which are being issued by the institute. Most of the questions have got 4 or 5 sub points in them. Because we are primarily, since we are focusing a lot of our time on questions in the sense practical questions as we call it. So we are in a mode of a question being asked and an answer being in totality. We are less focused on headings. But headings in this subject are very, very important. If the question is based on characteristics of MIS, there are 8 points within the characteristics. If you don't remember the headings themselves, you will not be able to write the answer at all. Even after remembering the headings, if you put in the headings, obviously that comfort goes to the examiner that this guy knows the concept. He might then even obviously he will still view the other answer, but once that comfort has come in, your marking could be more favorable. Because if you have not put the headings in the right order or you have not skipped the headings, that examiner might not be too interested to drill down to your question and find out if it is right or wrong. So headings are very, very important in this subject. For that matter, I think for all the subjects which have got headings, they are important, but for ISCA, a lot of, just like any paper, once you have seen this webinar, just take any previous examination and see if what is the importance of headings. You will definitely agree with me. Most of the questions are focused on characteristics or features of, a lot of questions are focused on that. So, and if you don't remember the headings, you can't, I think it will be very difficult for you to attempt the question. Then I like to focus on something which I call as a similar sounding question. In our videos, I have referred to that very often, SSQ or similar sounding questions. Now, what are these similar sounding questions? In fact, a couple of years back, one of my students brought out a paper to me. He said, I attempted all the questions. All of them were supposedly right. I didn't clear. I said, okay, you do one thing. You take you get a copy of your paper from the institute. Let us put our thought on that. So, so let us try to analyze how the way the paper is gone. So now what happened? He obviously got the paper from the institute. We drilled down to understand what he had done. There was a particular question which was focusing on management information systems. That is one of the different information systems which we cover. So the question was prerequisites of an effective MIS. Now there is another question in the same chapter, in the same topic, which talks about characteristics of an MIS. Now, characteristics of an MIS, prerequisites of an MIS. On the first, when you hear it for the first time, you might think it's similar, but they are given as two different questions in your module. They are not similar. They are two questions, different answers. Yes, lot of overlapping in between, but they are not similar. And that is what lot of students, where a lot of students do the mistakes. In our videos, we have covered around 20, more than I think 25 similar sounding questions, which I tell the students that don't think these two questions are similar. There's a difference between the two. For example, the same question, let us take characteristics of an effective MIS. When I talk of characteristics of MIS, I would say that what are the features of an MIS? There are 8 points in that. One is your management oriented. That is, just to explain this example better, management system is your any information system which is helping the management. For example, I have my books of accounts, but at the same time, I want the results to be more presented in a different way. I can tell my CFO that you keep your accounting book separate, but at the same time, prepare a separate set of numbers for me. So what would I do with these numbers? The separate set of numbers, you do one thing, you exclude depreciation. I don't want that. Whatever your provisions are there, exclude that also. I cannot exclude these things from the books of accounts. But for management information system, that is for making a presentation to the management, I can do away with those things. I can focus exclusively on what the management wants. And in this case, the management, that is the CFO, says, or the company president says that I only want, let us say, what are the cash profits. So exclude depreciation, exclude any provisions, etc. you've done, and just tell me the other numbers and tell me on a month-on-month basis, compare them with the same month in the last year and probably for 2 more years, and also tell me the budget for next 2 or 3 years. So this is a very jumbled up data. A normal accounting system would not produce that. So we need to develop a management information system. Obviously, you take a lot of data from your accounting systems, do some modification, and then process and give it to the management. So for MIS, the first question is characteristics of MIS. So the answer is management oriented. Obviously, management oriented means that the system is focused on what the management wants. That is the first characteristic. It is management oriented. That is, it is tilted towards the management. Second characteristics is management directed. It is directed by the management. Your accounting books are not directed by management. They are directed or governed by your accounting principles, accounting standards, accounting procedures. But MIS can be directed by the management in any way they want. So that is a second characteristic. Third characteristic is heavy planning element. A lot of planning goes into MIS. It might go for days, it might go for months. Fourth is your common database. Common database means, for example, I want to ask an inventory guy how much inventory have you used or have you received in a particular month, and it says I've received say 100 tons of a raw material A, then the purchase person should also say that we have purchased 100 tons of raw material A, and the inventory person should be saying the same thing, and the accounts person should be processing 100 tons of inventory A's bill, that is payments for 100 tons of inventory item A. So all the three departments should be talking of same item with the same name and the same quantity or whatever. So that similarity of database, that common database results in two characteristics: common database and common data flows. So which are the fourth and fifth points. The next characteristic is it should be integrated and having the subsystem concept at the same time. That is, it should be clubbed. All the MI should be clubbed and presented to the management as a whole. And last point is computerized. It might be, it is not necessary that MI has to be computerized, but it will obviously strengthen the MIs. So these are 8 topics within a heading like characteristics of MIs. Management oriented, management directed, heavy planning element, common database, common data flows, integrated, subsystem concept, and the last is your computerization. Now the second question is, the first one was characteristics. Now first of all, the characteristics can also be asked as features. Don't be confused. I have seen that in a lot of previous examinations, one word is changed. You replace characteristics by features, you replace features by attributes, and the student is confused. It's just a change of a single word. That should not be the case. So the first question can be characteristics or features, and second question is your prerequisites of MOEs. So when I say prerequisites, I mean what all things I need to be in place before I can have an MOEs. What all things should be in place before we can go about having implemented MOEs. So prerequisites has a different answer. First is qualified system and management staff. That is, you need to have trained people. Unless you have trained people, you will not be having an effective MOE system. Then you need to have support of top management. Now, support of top management is very similar to the point we just covered in the first question. Management oriented and management directed. And here it is being called support of top management. Third point here is database. We had a point of common database there, and we have a point of database here. Then we have a point of control and maintenance of MIS and evaluation of MIS. I will not be discussing those in detail here, but these are the 5 points in this question. The first question was characteristics of an effective MIS. Second was prerequisites of an MIS. And within them, they had 2 or 3 common points. And that student had attempted the other question, and he was in a lot of confidence that I had done the question right. And that happens when you have run through the subject, you have dedicated 30 hours at one go and finished it. You will not be able to remember these minute details. These things probably did not happen at my time, but they are happening now. The subject has been changed in a way that these things are being asked. So this is what I call similar sounding questions. So again, this is something you need to keep very much in mind. So till now, what all exam points we have covered? We have talked about how the content, the flow of the chapter should be there, what order they should be studied. Then we have talked about the relevance of headings which are there. Very, very important all these headings are. Then we have talked about the similar sounding questions. And the last point which we'll cover today would be taking up what is called as a case study. Now again, case studies is something which have created an havoc amongst the students. A lot of problems are being faced. A lot of people are anxious as to how the case study would be asked, or what it would be. So let us take a small example of a case study. I'll run you through to a question which was asked in May 2012. Case study normally happens, they give you a situation and they ask you 4 questions about that particular situation. Now, what happened when this case study started coming in for the first time, say 5 or 6 years back? There was a ERP chapter in your ISCA, and It was called MICS in those days. And the 4 questions, there was a case study, and all the 4 questions were related to that particular chapter only. But then the trend changed. So what happened then was that a particular case study is given, and then 4 questions might be asked. And in fact, for most of the attempts, they are asked from different chapters. So let us just quickly go through one of the case studies. I'll read you for that. ABC is a leading company in the manufacturing of food items. It's May 2012, if you want to go through that sometime later. The company is in the process of automation of various business processes. Company is in the process of automation. During this phase, technical consultant has highlighted the importance of information security. So company is automating the process. They have hired a consultant, and the consultant is highlighting that information security is very, very important for the company. And is suggested to include it right from the beginning. He is also suggested to perform risk assessment activity. It's a full-fledged topic in itself, risk assessment. So consultant has said you should have security right from beginning. You should have risk assessment procedures in place. In addition, after each activity, appropriate standards compliances have been tested and to check the quality of each process. Various policies related with business continuity planning and disaster recovery planning have been implemented. So this question, first 6 or 7 lines have given different names. It talks about risk assessment, it comes from a different chapter. It talks about information security policy, it comes from a different chapter. It talks about business continuity planning, that itself comes from a different chapter. So when you first read the question, that confusion straight away comes in. Then let's go for the answer. But the answer is not that difficult. If you just need to read, you just need to think that the question which is asked, try to take it as a standalone question, and in most of the cases you will be able to answer. Sometimes it's tricky. Part A was very tricky but very simple. What are the major suggestions given by the consultant? How is the company implementing these suggestions? The first time somebody read the question, if you remember all the 8 chapters, even if a person has gone through all the chapters, he might be wondering, where has this question come from? I'll read the question again for you. ABC is a leading company in the manufacturing of food items. The company is in the process of automation of various business processes. During this phase, technical consultant of the company has highlighted the information security and suggested to introduce it right from the beginning. He has also suggested to perform the risk assessment and accordingly to mitigate the assessed risks. For carrying out all the suggestions, various practices have been followed by the company. In addition, appropriate standards compliances have been tested to check the quality of each process. Various policies related with business continuity and disaster recovery planning have been implemented. Read the following carefully and very, very carefully and answer the following. What are the major suggestions given by the technical consultant? How is the company implementing these suggestions? To answer this question, I would remind you of something we used to do in school days, class 4, 5, comprehension. Read the lines above and find out the answer. And in 99% of the cases, the answer was within the lines themselves. This was a very, very tricky case put up by the institute. What is the answer? The answer lies in the question itself. I'll just read the answer for you now. During the automation of processes, the technical consultant has given the following major suggestions. First suggestion, by realizing the importance of security, he suggested to introduce it right from the beginning. This line has been copied verbatim from the question itself. Then, in addition, he also suggested to perform the risk assessment activity. Then he advised to mitigate the risk. For the implementation of all the suggestions, the company took the following steps. They followed best practices for each process. They did the compliance of appropriate standards, and then the company implemented the policies related to business continuity planning. This question, the answer to part A, this was a 20 marks question, part A, B, C, D, all for 5 marks. That is the trend these days also. And it was a direct copy of what was given in the question. Now, May 2012, question number 1, case study. Now, what happens is we are mentally prepared for such questions in other subjects. I remember when I used to study costing, one of my teachers used to tell me if it's a, I don't know, to be very honest, what the trend is now, but he used to tell me then, if there are 20 lines in the question, the answer would be very similar. And if the question is for 3 lines, the answer might be very complicated. So that we realized that doing costing at the time. But for costing, for accounts, for SFM, you are prepared. The question would be such. For ISCA, you are not prepared. You don't think that question would be asked in such a way. You are used to, even I have been used to, straightforward questions. What are the features? What are the advantages? What are the 5 methods, 3 methods, 2 methods? And that is still the way 70 to 80 marks of paper is set. So nothing to worry. But this 20 marks question, case study, which is mandatory, this confuses the students. The only reason is they are not prepared to think, or they do not think that question can be asked in such a way. So this was just a copy paste. Whatever was given in the question was the answer. So this was not from any chapter. This was from general aptitude. If I would have gone through all the 8 chapters, where has this question come from, I would not have been able to answer the same. It was a simple general aptitude question. Then part B, discuss risk assessment. Obviously, at that time, there was a chapter on risk assessment. Now the same has been moved to another chapter, that is concept of governance. In the risk assessment has been shifted there. Within this also, we studied risk assessment as a huge topic within, which has got several subtopics within itself. But the question was asked for 5 marks. So the student had to summarize the content of the entire chapter and put it in 5 marks. So that summarizing was required, which every student did it on his own way. But first, you should know that they are wanting the summary. Third question was, where out of the various types of plans used in business continuity planning, discuss the recovery plan in brief. So again, this is a very straightforward question. If you were done the chapter of business continuity planning, we discuss about different plans such as backup plan, recovery plan, testing plan, emergency plan. There are 4 types of plans, and one of those plans is the recovery plan. So it had to be quoted from there. So if you take up the current syllabus, the part B has come from chapter 6, the part C has come from chapter 4. And the last part was what should be the major components of a good information security policy. Again, this has come from some other chapter. So the case study as such is not out of syllabus. A lot of people ask me, if you are taking a class, will you also cover case study? Case study is not something different. It is from the chapter itself. Case study, it's simply 4 questions have been put in a way that the jumbled question has been there, and 4 sub questions have been put in, but it is not out of syllabus as such. So the mantra to attempting the case study is to treat the 4 questions in as separate questions, part A, B, C, D. Don't try to read between the lines too much. Don't try to link up much of this question. Just try to first identify the 4 parts. Are there any parts which are straight away questions? For example, if I would have to attempt this question, I would say, okay, part C and part D are straightforward questions, straight from the book. Major components of a policy, I've written it. Then recovery plan, I've written it. Then I would have got that confidence. Okay, part C and D are done. Now I'm left with part A and B. Part B, then I've studied a bit. Okay, this is from risk assessment chapter, so I need to put in the summary. So, and then part A would have been attempted. But if you start thinking too much as to how these 4 parts are related, is there a common topic, then that is where the students are stuck. Now, I'm not saying that in every attempt they'll put from different chapters. Now, there could be a case when all the 4 parts would come from a single chapter, so don't get confused. That would also happen. But the trend mostly these days is that four parts are coming from four different chapters. Or one is from, say, a general aptitude question. So that is the relevance of what we call as a case study. So this was another important aspect I wanted to discuss with you. So I think that is a brief of how the subject goes and how you should prepare for the subject. So for which I have given you a few points, relevant points. First of all, you need to follow the subject in an order and try to relate the particular subject. You should follow in a particular order, and the 8 chapters should be studied as such. And then you need to understand keep in mind that questions can be very, very similar sounding. For example, the question of MIS which we have shared. Then you should keep in mind the relevance of headings, because headings are very, very important for the subject. And lastly but not the least, try to be easy with the case studies. Don't panic too much, and it will be very, very helpful if you can actually drill down the case studies. So this is what the agenda for today's webinar was, and so that is all we would like to cover as part of this webinar. And if you can go through the videos, and if there are any particular questions, you can obviously consult us. So that is all for today. So I hope you enjoy doing ISCA. Try to do away with that dreaded reputation the subject carries. If you study it a little more, then the things would be definitely easier for you. And the only problem we face is we don't give it too much of time. We want to finish it in, say, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days. But it's again a 100-mark subject. You cannot do that. A few of your friends would have accidentally passed, and they would have boasted that I studied for 3 days and passed, but that is not the case in every case. So that's it for now, and good luck.